Hey, so this video is gonna be me talking about things again, surprisingly. Anyway, I'm gonna talk about what I'm going to call ghosts, but I don't know if they actually are ghosts. You can call them a lot of different names, and ghost is like just the word we use to captivate some sort of experience we may have of some sort of entity which exists outside of ourselves and seems to be conscious and able to do things and affect the world. But yeah, whether that's a ghost or not, I don't know. It could be a spirit, it could be a demonic entity, it could be a good entity, it could be anything. Just like some sort of energy, some sort of thing which exists outside of the realm of matter. And yeah, so I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I think I do. I mean, I think I believe that there's something more than just the material world, than just that which meets the eye, and I think I've talked about this before on here, which I probably have. But I don't think, well, yeah, I don't think we should assume that everything to be known about the world can be tested empirically, or maybe empirically isn't the right word, but scientifically. So it can't necessarily be proved, but then again, maybe that's a misinterpretation of science, because science doesn't necessarily set out to prove things. It just looks at probabilities. So if there's a lot of evidence pointing towards one thing, we can assume that that evidence equates to some cause or some truth that we may be able to derive, but that truth isn't necessarily absolute, because there could be evidence which comes forth in the future which then falsifies the initial hypotheses or the initial theory or I the initial proclamation of truth. So science doesn't necessarily prove things absolutely. But I think there are some experiences that we can have as humans in a very complicated world which seem absolutely inexplicable. And you may state these experiences that you've had, and some people might try and formulate some sort of scientific explanation. But as to the validity of that scientific explanation, I'm uncertain about, because maybe these experiences are reducible down to the material substrate of the brain. Maybe they can be explained through different neurotransmitters acting in different sorts of ways, which then produce these experiences. But I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, because we can think of our brain as like a receptor of reality almost. It's based on the idea of the nature of the knower. So the way in which we experience the world is through our own phenomenological perspective. So we have a filter, and we use that in order to be able to interpret reality essentially in many different ways, and on many different levels. And it's not just like one means of interpretation. There are multiple layers of reality almost. So it's like you have your actual visual perception of the world, which is maybe there is a cat sat behind me, and that's like an objective fact that I'm picking up. But then there's a judgment there, there's a feeling. It's like, how do I feel about there being a cat there? How do I feel about the actual cat? Um, how do I what are my general judgments about that cat being there, and why was it that I chose to point out the fact that there was a cat there instead of any of the other material things in this room, which I could have pointed out. And maybe it's because the cat is almost significant to me because I really like cats, and that's possible. But anyway, my point is that there's a layer of subjectivity within our interpretation of reality. So we don't experience the world as matter, we experience the world as matter and meaning. And it's that subjective meaning that I'm almost interested in. But okay, that's almost down a little bit of a tangent as to where I was actually going. So so like I was saying before, the nature of the knower, we experience the world based on the way in which our minds interpret it. Okay? So if that's the case, if the world is slightly, if not wholly, contingent on our experience as a human being, as a conscious entity, then is there not things that our brain is not wired to be able to pick up? And that's possible. or maybe our brains are wired to be able to pick these things up. It's just that we have to almost undergo a change in a state of consciousness in order to be able to actually receive this sort of sensual data. And I guess to take this to an extreme extent, you could say drug use allows us to do this, like ingesting certain substances may induce some sort of mystical type experience which causes us to be able to tap into this other realm of existence, which is, well, I'm saying over because it's not the norm, it's not typically what we would experience on a day-to-day basis in our regular lives. But what's interesting about mystical experiences is that they can come about through the use of, say, psychedelic substances like LSD or psilocybin, but they can also come about through sober states. So we can put our minds into certain states of consciousness, maybe consciously or unconsciously, and then we can have a feeling or a sense of the noumenal, or the numinous even. I guess you could say either. Probably the numinous makes more sense because that's more like a spiritual thing, whereas the noumenal is more like things in and of themselves. So that's quite interesting because it almost proves in some ways that a mystical experience is not just the result of consuming drugs. It's not just the way that our brain interacts with the chemical composition of certain substances, because if we can have these experiences sober without actually ingesting any sort of psychedelic substance whatsoever, then there must be some other component within our mind that is actually able to produce this experience. And I don't know if produce is the right word, because that suggests that it's just our mind which actually does produce the experience and not necessarily actually pick up the experience from some sort of external source, which is also possible. But then again, we can't really prove that. Like, is a religious experience or a mystical experience or a spiritual experience or whatever you want to call it, is that just a product of our minds, or is that some sort of eternal entity, not inferring anything specific, God? Is it a God that's inducing that experience and communicating with us, or a ghost or a spirit or entity, or is it just our mind producing that experience? And we can't know that, I don't think. But maybe we can know it. Maybe, or at least we can't know it for certain, because like I was saying, even in science, you don't get objective, absolute facts. You just get probabilities. But maybe we can do some scientific, empirical research into religious experiences and actually find out some common themes within religious experiences. And if there's a lot of common themes and a lot of things being reported by people universally, and these correlate with one another, then perhaps we could suggest that this is some sort of objective phenomena in one sense of the word. I don't mean necessarily objective as in it exists outside of the human experience, because it is something we experience. A religious experience without the experience part isn't really any good to us. It doesn't hold any meaning. Like, if we didn't experience a religious experience, then we wouldn't reap the benefits of the religious experience, so it would be almost pointless. So it is subjective in the sense that we experience it, but then again, everything is subjective in the way that we experience it. But does it have an objective element to it in that it does exist, or it is caused by something which is noumenal to the human experience? And that's something I'm interested in. And actually, it was William James, who was a 19th century physician, who did studies about religious experience, and he did find common themes. He found that, trying to remember the analogy, there was a pint analogy, which he didn't call it a pint analogy, but that's just the way I'm remembering it. So there was, I can't remember it in order. Apparently, passivity. I think that was the first one. Passivity means, I can't remember. Pardon my French. Okay, I haven't studied this for a while. I remember like 3 of them. So there's ineffability, and ineffability is the idea that we can't actually explain the religious experience. It's hard to actually reduce it down to language, because it does, in this case, labels really do negate, because the actual experience of the numinous is, it's almost impossible to put into language because it's so transcendent, and yeah, it's really hard to describe. And this is what a lot of people reported, but obviously we have to have a means of discussing it in one way or another, so language is our best means of doing so. As to whether it is adequate, that is debatable, and I'd say it probably isn't adequate, but if it's the best thing we have, then we might as well use it and just try to put a lot of emphasis on the fact that it is ineffable. It's noetic, so it will often leave people with a sort of sense of awe, a sense of beauty, like a way of perceiving beauty in the world that isn't usually possible. So, for example, we could have like a noetic experience by going out and looking at a beautiful sunset, and this is also ineffable as well. Like you might get an author who's extremely good at writing, and they might be able to describe the sunset and create this image in your mind, and you might actually experience the beauty of a sunset. But it's essentially noetic and ineffable, and it's hard to put into language, but it does induce a really beautiful feeling. So people often describe religious experiences as quite noetic. And the next one is transient, so they pass. They often don't last more than a few seconds, a few minutes. It's very rare that you'll see a religious experience lasting more than half an hour, and if that does happen, then you probably want to look down the lines of mental illness, such as schizophrenia or something like that. But yeah, so I think the fact that people report having religious experiences and report common themes does suggest that there is a degree of objectivity in these experiences. And also, it's not just those sorts of things. Like, they're more like descriptive words of a religious experience, but what actually happens, there's also common themes in that. So, people often report maybe going down a tunnel towards a light. Some people report their soul or something inside them leaving their body so that they're able to look down on themselves and other people from a different perspective, while their conscious body may be unconscious, and it's almost like their consciousness has drifted away and is able to perceive the body. And this is like an argument that we actually do have a soul or some sort of separate part of ourselves, which can exist perhaps after death. And that's quite interesting as well. Yeah, so there is a lot of common themes within religious experiences. So you could say that religious experiences are objective, and I know I just said that, but I think, yeah. Essentially, I'm going to say that we can't know for certain. That's what I've got to say, because we just can't. Maybe some people can, maybe some people can feel like they know, and maybe I can even say that I know personally, but I can't make any objective truth claims about it. I can just talk about my subjective experiences and what I believe and why I believe them, but I can't actually say that that's going to be true for you. However, I probably believe that it's true for you if I believe it's true for me in some ways. And that doesn't apply to everything, because I might say that something is good for me, like studying philosophy, but that really might not be good for you. You might not have an interest in that, so just don't study philosophy. However, I think studying philosophy is good, but not objectively. Yeah, so I don't know. Like, I've had some experiences with, like, ghosts, you might call them, and other sort of, strange entities that I don't know if actually did exist outside of myself or in my head. Don't know. And are people crazy when that happens? I don't know. But the thing is, you could say that religious experiences is just a result of having mental illness, but oftentimes when people have religious experiences, they'll report it as one of the most meaningful experiences in their life, and it'll often lead to an increased sense of well-being and a more positive and fulfilling life after the experience. So I don't think you can say it's mental illness, because illness implies something negative, and these experiences clearly aren't negative if they're having positive impacts on individuals. So maybe religious experience is like a form of a pragmatic truth. So it doesn't actually matter as to whether it's happened, but it's maybe pragmatic truth isn't the right word, but a pragmatic experience. So in this sense, you could actually describe religious experiences as having an evolutionary benefit, because so you say that you're going through evolution, and then people start maybe ingesting mushrooms or having these sorts of experiences, and it's like, whoa, these actually improve life. And then the people who've had them end up living longer and happier and better lives, and then they're able to interact with people to a greater degree in a social sphere. And this just improves everything. So then evolution was like, right, we're going to create more of these. We're going to give people religious experiences, and oftentimes religious experiences emerge out of chaos. And this is sort of like a Jungian idea, in that chaos leads to transformation. So you go through a chaotic experience, or your life is absolute chaos, and then you have this experience, and everything becomes beautiful, and everything changes, and it's a pragmatic experience to have, in that it does improve your life. So I don't think, I don't know whether it's absolutely true or anything like that, but it helps. Anyway, I'm gonna go because my mom's just got home. So thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting. I don't know.